For my oral history report, I interviewed Dale Garcia, which is my grandmother on my mother's side. She was born in California in 1951, and she's lived here her whole life. I decided to interview her on the feminist movement that occurred in the 60s and 70s in America. So what I learned from her, that it wasn't just the feminist movement that was going on at the time, it was also the civil rights movement and people protesting the Vietnam War. So it was a culmination of all these groups that were protesting and fighting to change, and it was just a large upheaval of the social norms that were previously held, and everyone wanted to change for the better for themselves. So it was, these protests, they weren't all peaceful. There was a lot of violence that occurred. A lot of people died. But eventually they saw a change, and this was one of the biggest changes in America that any generation had experienced. I think the most interesting thing that I learned from talking to her in this interview was actually about the specific story when she went to a march in Berkeley. It was to promote women's rights. They marched through the Berkeley campus, but at the very end, they all took off their bras and threw them in a pile, and they burned their bras in protest because they were saying that bras were kind of holding them back and strapping them down. So when they burned them, it was kind of a symbol for them being liberated and liberation. So I thought that was pretty cool. And just overall, it was pretty just awesome learning from my grandma, that she's done all this stuff and just never knowing. And then when I interviewed her, I found out all this cool, interesting stuff about her. So I was really glad I decided to interview her for this project.